Christmas morning, I stumbled up the stairs to my second-floor unit after a rather uneventful night of pulling security. The quietness that once filled the midnight darkness was now replaced by the annoying, infuriating, and maddening sound of battery-powered smoke detectors chirping in now vacant units. The result of out-of-control raging infernos and improper home heating sources. The excitement and anticipation I once had as a child on Christmas morning was replaced today with misery, gloom, and exhaustion from the constant struggle to navigate and survive this new world of Armageddon. Walking into my unit, I began removing my chest rig and gear I depended on for my 10-plus hour shift. I grabbed a new 1-pound canister of propane and began threading it onto the connection of my Mr. Buddy heater, as I'd routinely do each morning before I'd retire for a few hours of much-needed rest inside my 3-person tent. Turning the knob to pilot, pressing it down 2 times until the pilot light ignited and roared to life for the 4 hours I would sleep. Even with no electricity, no power, and polar temperatures, the 4,000 to 9,000 BTU radiant heater provided more than enough heat, even on the low setting. I'd routinely have to pull off some clothes and blankets to keep me from sweating profusely inside my cozy and snug tent. Within just minutes, I'd be knocked out, often suffering from horrific nightmares of images that felt so real. Many depicting vile and spine-chilling circumstances of my neighbors losing their lives to gruesome gangs that penetrated our walls. You would think sleep would be the one thing you can enjoy when society collapses and social chaos runs rampant, but your mind never stops racing. The daily occurrences of atrocities remain with you, no matter which of the 5 stages of sleep you are in. Less than 60 minutes into my slumber, I was awakened by a thunderous and ear-piercing explosion that shook our brick building, quickly followed by screeching screams from Jody down below. I immediately jumped up, grabbing my rifle, struggling to unzip the tent door. My body was shaking from the fear of the unknown. Carefully peeling back the curtains to my sliding glass door, hoping to reveal the source of the immense and tumultuous detonation. The parking lot was a netherworld of fire and brimstone. Hellfire was raining down from the early morning sky. Multiple vehicles were already fully engulfed as shaken and terrified neighbors looked on. I ran downstairs and Jody and Jim were panic-stricken, pointing up at the heavens. Jody, now crying, said the sky is falling. "It's either asteroids or comets," Jim declared. "I don't think so, neighbor. Those are satellites that short-circuited and lost communication and are plunging into the atmosphere, burning up, raining down like missiles aimlessly, eradicating whatever is in its path," I announced. The over 2,000 plus active satellites that orbit Earth were now descending down and adding to the hellish landscape, all caused by a massive solar flare on the sun's surface. Mass starvation, dehydration, hypothermia, deadly epidemics, and lawlessness were now not the only thing we had to fear. This was not the Christmas morning gift I desired. Confusion, turmoil, bedlam, and pandemonium was dominating the scene of horrors on Christ's birth. At one time, I counted a half-dozen or so plummeting projectiles on the horizon. Helpless and defenseless, we gathered outside, thigh-deep in snow, in the courtyard that separated the buildings, tracking and following the paths that the fiery debris was taking, hoping and praying the final destination of a scorching satellite wouldn't be our building. Imagine having your vast stockpile of supplies and preps being completely taken out by an out-of-control communications satellite on Christmas Day. Modern society was crumbling, spiraling, and deteriorating at an alarming rate. Thinking the nightmarish scenario was over, we turned to return inside our building when I noticed another blindingly intense fireball hissing through the sky. The light from the object was 10 times brighter than the sun, most likely visible 100 miles away. The second free-falling fiery missile that was going to make a direct impact into our complex. The first hit had exploded onto multiple cars just a few hundred feet from where I was sleeping at. This one was barreling down with high velocity and had no regard or concern for whatever got in its way. Within mere seconds, another explosion generated a scintillating flash, producing a hot cloud of dust and gas, as well as a small shock wave. It made direct contact, smashing and pummeling another building just to the east of ours. It immediately ignited another angry inferno as the building was now completely engulfed in massive flames. The three of us struggled as we raced through the thigh-high snow, not knowing if anyone was still occupying and living inside that building. The twin explosions had created more panic among the neighbors than the previous 11 days combined. Like Jim and Jody, most probably thought this was a once-in-a-lifetime, cataclysmic comet strike pouring down from deep space. The potent and extreme heat that was coming off the massive conflagration was overbearing and too intense to get close to. Anyone who survived the impact and was trapped inside would perish within minutes, their body experiencing dramatic burns to its tissues and extreme shrinkage to the skin, severe enough to cause the skin around their neck to strangle the victim. A painful and horrific way for anybody to meet one's end. Christmas morning by 9 a.m. was just a completely shocking and frightening scene. By now, a crowd of a dozen or so had gathered outside in horror as we witnessed the building ablaze. Jody was mentally and emotionally broken, distraught, shattered, and overcome from the early morning monstrosity. She questioned and suggested that we should evacuate and flee to the rumored warming center in the downtown of our city. It was an idea I personally would never entertain. The Blue Cross Arena had a seating capacity of 13,000. Our city and surrounding area had a population of close to 250,000. Even if you could safely make the journey, would you want to join those odds, I asked. Still grief-stricken, she said, "What do you mean? Remember Hurricane Katrina and the House of Horrors that was the Superdome? 16,000 people settled in there eventually, and within 2 days, it had degenerated into unspeakable horror. Children sleeping in pools of urine, crack pipes littering the restrooms, blood-stained walls next to smashed-out vending machines. Supplies ran low very fast, and rapes ran disgustingly high when the arena darkened at night. I remember hearing the story of a man who jumped 50 feet to his death, committing suicide in front of thousands, saying he had nothing left to live for. There was no sanitation. The stench was overwhelming as feces covered the walls. Once inside, they weren't allowed to leave, and forget about being able to arm yourself in there. There's absolutely no way that'll fly. They'll confiscate our firearms. I'll die right here before I ever entertain the thought of being unarmed in this ungodly, wicked world. Besides, Katrina was a local event. What we're experiencing is a nationwide, possibly worldwide event. Resources stretched far thinner, and crime, anarchy, rebellion, and mutiny running far more rampant. Probably not the best thing to say to her in her current mental state, but she needed to hear the harsh realities that this new world had become. Jim knew I was right about the conditions and the possible predatory environment inside the arena. We were all shaken and agitated as we slowly trudged through the snow, returning to our four walls and a roof. It had been 4 days now since I had last been able to make radio contact with Blake. I often wondered what happened to him. Did his ham radio simply die? Did he and his family get overrun by murderous marauders? Did they decide to battle the blustery Arctic winter conditions and bug out? I knew what street he lived on, but did not know his exact address. It wasn't worth the risk of wandering out without his precise coordinates. There was no more venturing out aimlessly in this perilous, high-risk world. The three of us huddled around Jim's Mr. Buddy heater in his apartment, just trying to take the edge off of our frigid and frosty bodies. Jody, still quivering from the early morning encounter, was bringing water to a boil on the Coleman camp stove. Her hands trembled as she filled the mugs with blistering, piping hot water, mixing in packets of hot chocolate. I didn't dare let her carry it over to Jim and I. Instead, I urgently rushed into the dimly lit kitchen, grabbing them myself. Sipping my sultry cup, I stood at the sliding glass door, peering out at the two fires still burning. People so dire and desperate for heat, they were congregated around both. Unaware or just so hopeless, they weren't concerned or bothered by the fumes they were ingesting. In just 13 short days, the world was unrecognizable. Bugging in can be a death sentence, as fixed positions can always be ground down by a siege. Bugging out makes you a refugee, and most never fare well in a crisis. Pick your poison, I thought to myself. Jim and Jody were seated on the couch, her head laying on his shoulders as he tried to calm her fear and anxiety. Less than a month ago, the three of us were gathered in this same place, playing cards, enjoying adult beverages, shots, and listening to music. Now we were wargaming, fighting for survival, battling both the weather conditions outside and the constant threat of roving raiders. We had maintained daily contact with Michael and Brian at the Independent Senior Living Center. With the help of a few neighborhood locals, they had been able to keep the doors from being breached by bandits. Their biggest dilemma was medication-dependent elders who would soon be running out of prescriptions, life-preserving drugs that were no longer available. 13 days in, and multiple missed dialysis appointments were starting to show its effects on Brian. Water retention and noticeable swelling in his legs and feet. Drowsiness and fatigue were overtaking his body. Even the simplest of chores was draining him. Michael said Brian did not have much of an appetite, and he had walked in on him vomiting from nausea more than once the past week. He'd been a trooper over these 2 weeks, stepping up on multiple occasions. Volunteering to relocate and help care for 100-plus seniors was both admirable and valiant. He was determined to contribute and fight all the way to the end. I couldn't be prouder of him. In the event of the unthinkable, Michael was going to need help to maintain the building. Maybe it was time for me and my neighbors to abandon our residence. The thought of leaving any of my preps behind was unfathomable to me. Just transferring my stockpile of ammunition would be a daunting task. Then you had the food, water, medical, and everything else. I knew Jody was ready to evacuate and clear out of the complex, and if she was, Jim would be too. I figured after this day of dread, now would be as good a time as any to sit down and discuss the idea with the two of them. I want to talk about something with you guys, I said. As I began to sit down and rest my tired body in the chair and debate the decision, a forceful and powerful knock reverberated and pulsated on the exterior door to our building. The three of us looked at one another with stunned and shocked looks. Who's knocking on the door during doomsday, I thought to myself. Was it friend or foe, ally or adversary? The initial knocks were now followed up with even harder and more forceful taps and raps. Jody, grab your rifle and head to the bedroom. Jim, you follow behind me, but don't exit your place. I cracked open the door to the hallway, asking who it was and to identify yourself. No answer as a third round of thuds rattled off the glass door.